everybody sort of know each other, right?
Yeah.
I don't think John and I have ever met in person.
No, I don't believe so.
Well,
John,
it's good
are
to
you-
meet you, John.
Nice to see you too.
John, are you
I
still at
just-
the university, or did you retire yet?
No, I retired in 2014, but it didn't stick.
It didn't stick?
No. A year and a half later, Seeds of Faith Christian Academy had a band director crisis.
Okay.
And the principal asked me to come in at the last minute and get them through a spring concert because their band director just walked out on them one day.
Okay.
And I agreed to do that and
Mhm.
did that. And then she said, well, as long as we got through the concert, could I see them through the rest of the year?
Okay.
And I said, yeah, I'll do that. And then she said, well, as long as you've seen us through the year, will you come back next year? And that was 5 years ago.
Okay.
And I'm still there. So
Okay.
actually, this is my 50th year of teaching.
Is it your 50th?
50th.
Wow.
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 It may be the last, but I enjoy it.
That's what I was going to
it's
say. I
enough-
think it's something you like, right?
It's a good school, and the teachers are wonderful people.
Okay.
And I view it as more of a ministry than a job anyway.
Right.
So
Right. Wow. Keep talking. I want to see where Kimball's at.
Bob, I quoted you on my to-do list.
Uh-oh.
Here's Kimball. Hello. I was just getting ready to call you. I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
And I'm going to put this on a little kind of a bulletin board in my classroom. It says, if we are ignorant of God's ways, we will mistake the faith-building process for a lack of love. It's out of one of your books.
Yeah.
I was
And
proofreading the-
Wait a minute. You have
I read
to
that.
you have to save that for the Zoom call. I think other people want to hear that too, John. That's good.
Very good.
well, it wasn't about the topic, though.
Oh, but it'll fit somewhere, I'm sure.
Well, it's very good because
Yeah.
so many people, when faced with a crisis, immediately their faith crumbles. Where is God? Or why did God
Right.
do this and all that? And they forget that we trust Him no matter what.
Yes, that's
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
That's right. So that's very appropriate for this topic as well. But before we're having this chat here, I love that everybody sort of know everybody. Kimball, you know everybody. Do you know Bob Santos?
I don't. Hello, Bob.
Hi, Kimball. Nice to meet you.
Good to
Could
meet
everybody just briefly introduce themselves? I know everybody here. Bob, you ate at my house before. You better remember, and you better say it was good.
It was good. It was very good.
Okay,
Delicious,
well,
as a
you
matter
can
of fact.
stay. So if you would just introduce yourself, John. We'll start with John, and then Bob, and then
introduce
Jackie,
Kimball.
and then Kimball.
I'll introduce Kimball. She's musician extraordinaire.
Oh, high
Wow.
praise. Oh, thank
Wow.
you, John. Thank you.
And that is the truth. And
Yeah.
I know her. I can say something else, but that's true.
Thank you.
That is absolutely the truth.
Thank you.
Bob, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. I have no musical ability, so
Me.
You won't hold that against you.
No,
Thank you so much.
other giftings.
Bob Santos. I am with Search for Me Ministries
Mm-hmm.
here in Indiana, PA, which is a teaching and publishing ministry.
Okay.
I
Jackie?
don't know. Is there anything else you wanted?
Is there anything else you want to say? Did
You
you
don't wanna
want to
get
tell us about
started.
your books? You're an author as well.
Oh, my.
Yeah, I've published 7 or 8 books at this point.
Was that
Wow.
all?
Keep track.
Is that all, Bob?
Yeah, and Jackie has
He's
been a
working on-
wonderful help.
He's
so,
working on 8, 9, and 10 currently.
Yeah, I think by the end of the year we'll have a total of 10, which includes one I did years ago and a workbook. So
Okay.
that'll be 10.
My.
Yeah, I told you.
Okay.
Wow.
Bob, do you have one published concerning what we're talking about? Anything that would help people?
I don't have a book specifically on this issue, but I have addressed it in a couple of my books to some degree.
Okay,
So,
okay.
the one that would probably be the most fitting is called From Glory to Glory,
Okay.
which is about identity essentially from a biblical perspective.
Okay, great.
Mm.
Okay. So I hope you talk a little bit about that because that sounds interesting. And
Yeah, we
Jackie,
can do
my
that.
friend Jackie, I would like to say I love you first to begin with.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. Oh, I love you.
Not that I don't
Thank
love you all, I do.
Yeah.
Dude, she was just my spring in the play that I wrote. She was spring, so she's just extra special. But go ahead,
Oh,
Jackie.
this is lovely. So I'm Jackie Keene. I'm John's wife. He's outside. I'm inside. I'm privileged to be able to proofread Bob's books, and they are excellent.
Oh,
Oh
Yeah. So I highly recommend get Bob's
Oh,
book. They're
cool.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. At the moment, I am teaching part-time at IUP, have been for a while in the music department, and that's a great privilege. I love it. I love those who now look like little kids, those little freshmen walking in my door,
Yeah.
little babies that are scared to death. So I'm very privileged to be over there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, amen. That's so Bob, it looks like you and I are the only ones who aren't so musically inclined.
Maybe not. I can speak for myself and say definitely not.
I can make a joyful noise unto the Lord. Hey, you know what? I'm sorry. Were you saying something?
I'm thinking maybe somebody else in this call got my musical ability. That's about
Yeah, all of them. Let's cling all of their heads together. All of these three. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining in. Of course, you know the topic today is racism within the church. I thought this team was good, would be a good team to talk about it. And I do these Zoom panels because I want it to be a place where people from all walks of life who are, and the new phase now besides the influencer is the word woke. And I'm not trying to go in to people who aren't willing to be changed or be aware of what's going on. I'm really searching out people who God is already working with, and so that we can go on in this, because that word that we used for so many years, repentance, and you just think it's something horrible. And of course, we know just from what I know from each of you that that's just a change of mind. It's a change. And this season, you can see that things have been put on the stage where we can see stuff. I mean, because of, the cell phones and different things, and we can see things that are taking place on the stage of human history. And we have a choice to make. We have a choice that we can say, no, this is wrong. Or we can say, wait a minute, let me think about it. Let me at least inquire about it. And so these minds, I ask you guys to come in so that we can talk about it, because it's not just for us, but it's for the listeners who are listening in. And you all sent me questions that were topics that we're going to talk about. And Bob, you said your questions would probably take a whole panel, a whole session. So that means you'll be back.
I think mine will take a couple of days too.
Yes, good. So we'll call this part one. So that means you're willing to come back.
Okay, we'll pack a lunch next time. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I will know a part two of this, but I think it is so important for us to talk, and no question on the floor is stupid. I mean, because the questions that we have, or you might have, somebody else listening may have. And so we want to answer it to the best of our ability, to be honest, to be open, and just put it out there. Are we willing to do that?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. We are. Absolutely. Absolutely, from everybody, right?
Absolutely.
So Kimball, I'm going to start with your question, and it says, to our white friends on the panel, that means it's y'all, to our white friends on the panel, how were you influenced to come to your anti-racist view? What encouraged you to get to this place where you are? And anybody can start.
Well, I will start.
Okay.
I grew up north in Wisconsin in a totally white area. I remember still as an elementary child seeing what we called then special education class walking by, and there was one little black girl in there. I bet anything she was not special ed, but she was the only black girl. I ever saw there. As I got older, I don't remember her ever being in school later. You know, a couple of
Okay.
years I would see her. And so then John and I lived in Florida, and we encountered really the first Black people we'd ever encountered, that I'd ever encountered before.
Okay.
And I thought all went well. And then being at House of Yahweh years ago,
Right.
I can't tell you how I appreciated my Black sisters and my Black brothers, but I was closest to my Black sisters, and I so appreciated you. I can talk later about specifics as to why, if we want to get to that.
Yeah,
But
I do.
in the last few years, I've had a student from IUP, a gorgeous, gorgeous Black singer named Chanel. And she and I just kind of glommed onto each other because we were both believers. She loves the Lord. In fact, I said, just before this came, I said, this is what I was going to do today. And I'd call her afterwards because she's the one who brought up the whole issue of race in the church. I have to confess, I didn't know it was an issue. And I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was an issue. And she brought it up. She pushed it. She pushed it. And finally I thought, wow, I need to pay attention. What is white privilege? Well, I've since done a lot of talking, a lot of praying, a lot of reading. And I see now it's a big deal. Right. So,
Jackie, how did she bring it up? What brought about her bringing it up?
Well, IUP is still a fairly white school, and the music department is even whiter. Not totally, but it's definitely very white. And she's a strong enough person and a strong enough believer that she didn't have a lot of trouble in the music department, but there were things. She would hear comments, and she's very open with me, very open. So she would tell me that so-and-so talked about the 4/5, 2/5. See, I don't even know. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, 3/5.
Forgive me. 3/5, thank you. Okay. So she mentioned that so-and-so had commented on that as a joke. So she would get these things from kids who were being stupid. And I thought, really? This is happening? And she would often say to me, do you stand up when you hear something like that? And I said, I never hear it. I don't hear it. Partly because they were students and I was faculty. They wouldn't say anything like that around me. But I had to say, I don't hear it. I like to think I would stand up if I heard it, but I don't hear it. And then there were other things much more subtle that she would mention had been offensive to her. And that's when I started to recognize and understand what white privilege was. The gist of it being for me that I never have to think about the color of my skin. And so I don't. I think, and forgive me, I know you love me, so I'm going to say this. I think white is normal.
Right.
Yeah. And so I started to realize that's my white privilege. There's more. Okay. I've talked a lot.
Okay. No, that's good, Jackie. That's good. Thank you so much. John, thank you. For real. Thank you. John, what would you add to that?
Well, it's not easy to pull together.
Okay.
Because of my age. I mean, I grew up in Wisconsin as well, and race wasn't an issue. I'm not sure there were any Asians, Hispanics, or Blacks in my high school. And so it just wasn't there. But after Jackie and I got married and moved to Florida, I encountered a very strange thing. And that was some of my dearest Christian friends, white friends, who had grown up in the South, were telling me how being raised in that environment, it was, they didn't know how to describe it except that it seemed to be in their blood. And they didn't agree with it and they didn't like it, but they couldn't completely shed their what they called inherited attitudes about racism, you know, and I couldn't understand that. I couldn't understand it in the same way that when I discovered some people I trusted suddenly told me that they believed that God had foreordained people to go to hell. And I what? Where do you find that in the scripture, you know?
Calvinism.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I didn't want to mention that in case one of you was, but anyway,
I am not.
Yeah, I am not.
Not at all.
I've got good friends who are, and it's been a stumbling block in our relationship, to mention the least. But getting back to the point, that's when I was in Florida, that's when I sort of realized there was a problem. But we moved to Colorado to get my PhD, then we moved to Ohio, then we moved to Pennsylvania, and we were concentrating on family and degrees and jobs and but after our current president got elected, all of a sudden this thing erupted.
Right.
I mean, I was thrilled when Barack Obama was elected, and I couldn't understand what all the fuss was, but I was thrilled nevertheless. And he was reelected, which I was thrilled about as well. I thought, okay, America has made a turn for the better here. But boy, was I deluded. The Civil War isn't over.
Right.
That's right.
Racism is alive and well in America, and it's I watch the news every day because we don't own a TV set. We've never owned a TV set, and so
I remember, John.
I get my news. We get our news on the internet, and I watch it every day. And it doesn't seem to matter which news service you look at. Basically, it's all the same. And there's articles every day, numerous articles every day, about insane people in the world. Well, I think they're insane.
Right.
But they don't think they're insane. And I just can't understand where white supremacists are coming from, especially those that live in America, because there are no Americans except for the Native Americans. And they don't seem to see that. They don't see that what Abraham Lincoln did. They don't see that the Civil Rights Act has been enacted. They don't see that the Civil War is over. And this leads me to my question. Okay? And that is that I've seen discussions like the one we're having right now, and we've had them. We have some wonderful Black friends in the church, in particular Donovan and his wife. I don't know if you know them. You know Donovan?
They're worth knowing.
No.
You know Donovan, Daniel? Donovan and Felicia?
Yeah, we knew Fee back in our college ministry days.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Well, they have come over here, and we've sat down sometimes for 7 or 8 hours at a time. But maybe 4 or 5 white people, 4 or 5 Black people at the table.
Right.
And I got a real education. It wasn't enough for me to empathize with how bad the situation is. They were telling me I had no clue how bad the situation was, and that I had no clue what it was like to be in it. Donovan, in fact, when we were sitting at the back porch, a few Harley Davidson motorcycles roared past, and he bolted up out of his seat. And I said, "What's the matter?" And he says, "Well, every time I hear that, I'm afraid that somebody's coming for me." And I'm thinking, he's telling me the truth, and I don't, and I've never been there. I don't get it, but I'm getting to get it. And so it makes me angry. I'm angry at the white people of America. I'm embarrassed because of them. But I still haven't gotten to my question. My question is, I've seen panels like this. I've been in panels like this. I read How to Be Anti-Racist by Kendi.
Yeah.
And took notes on the book, etc. And that was a good education for me to find out that even Blacks are racist between each other.
Colorism.
The colorism.
Absolutely.
Which I saw that in India I just thought it was stupid, but and I've read numerous articles and seen presentations and read Facebook posts which are both by black and white people, both of which were marvelous.
Mm-hmm.
Spoke well to the point. What they said was the truth. But the problem is, I don't think the right people are reading them.
Okay, that's exactly right.
You see, and because after all this has gone on now, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, almost 12 years, I don't see anything changing worldwide or even countrywide. In fact, it looks to me like it's getting worse. My wife argues with me. She says she thinks it's getting better. And I'm just saying, okay, but I don't see it. Mary also thinks
Your daughter?
My daughter, right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But I said, okay, but I don't see it. Show it to me. Well, she sort of has it in her soul or in her mind that it's getting better little by little. I said, well, I'm looking for something a little bigger. So my question to the two of you ladies is, have you actually seen evidence that all this, the good discussion in the books and the articles are having a positive impact towards change and making people, white people in America who used to be racist, change their minds?
Wow. Kimball, you want to hit that?
Yeah. Good question. I would say this, it is too soon to tell, because the end result of all of this, the protests and everything, it has to be the same as it was in the civil rights movement of the 60s. It has to come down to legislation. It has to come down to people of color, the BIPOC, they call them, the Black, Indigenous people of color, being in office and actually exacting change, because not everybody's going to change their mind. But if we can exact laws, you have to follow the law. Well, I mean, you should follow the law. It'll be a deterrent, a barrier. But I think
Can I say something about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I hear you, but seeing the polluted hearts of white people that I've seen, I don't think you can legislate holiness like that.
Oh, you can't. It has to be rule of law. It absolutely has to be.
No, I mean, I don't see, other than Jesus Christ changing a white man's heart, I don't see it happening.
You know what? I see both sides, actually. I'm experiencing both. It touched my heart in Portland that the majority of people out there were white. Well, of course, it's a white place, but still, the push, they came up against exactly what John Lewis, and all the other men and women who marched are coming up against. People who are hired guns to push back, their rights being curtailed and trounced upon. And so that heartened me, because they kept coming back and kept coming back and kept coming back. But amongst Black folks, I do notice a fatigue. We're just tired, but I notice that there's a rest coming, and which is why I believe it has to really, we have to address it in the church first.
Yeah.
We have to. I mean, I was telling someone the other day, I was like, if you knew what I went through in Indiana, PA, you would curl up in a fetal position.
Well, see, we never knew what you went through in Indiana, PA.
Who would have listened, John? Who would have listened? And particularly what we went through at House of Yahweh.
No kidding.
No, no kidding.
Boy, Jackie and I were oblivious.
Yeah. I mean, but the microaggression became a little more pointed. Would you say, Sharon? It became a little more, it wasn't blanket. It was directed at Sharon differently, directed at Paula differently, directed at Skip differently, and myself. So it became customized.
Right, that's exactly right. It's a good word for it.
The Sharon wouldn't have not experienced it with music, but I did.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me even more upset.
Yeah, I mean, I did. It's like it's too gospel, it's too emotional. Let's calm it down. Let's do this. Let's do that. And I bought that for many, many years. and that, you know, A Mighty Fortress Is Our God is so much better than anything by Andre Crouch or Kirk Franklin. It was more elevated.
Right.
And that was, it was more Jesus.
And it was more, it was also custom as opposed to where they thought, how they rated us. Like depending on your jobs, your education, it was like, you know, if you had more education or if you had more money, they sort of, we were placed, and I'm talking about a House of Y'all, where we were placed in categories of how important they thought we were.
Right, it was
And
the
so,
caste system for sure.
and so, you know, it was that kind of stuff. If you know, I remember one specific time when our pastor's wife at the time, because Herbie's dad was, my husband's dad was married a few times. I'll say a few, I won't say 5 because he's he was married a few times. And I remember our pastor's wife at the time, she was like, oh my gosh, was he, oh gosh, what, you know, she was just like, she was appalled. She never heard anything like that. And so the thought went through my mind, it's like, really? And so somebody had said at the time, they were like, and they said to her something about things that had taken place in her family, which was really, I could say really that took place. I never knew anything like that, but it was always where who you really were, you had to keep hidden, because if you wanted to be accepted, you had to be viewed, all of your good had to show, and the other part you had to hide. And so when we got together, the Black people, when we got together, we were who we were. But when we were with everybody else, we had to hide that side of us, so to speak. Then we would have said hide it then. We would have said they just didn't understand. But that's what we did. We had to hide it.
Right.
And so, you know, it was, you know, we'll talk more about that because that's one of the questions. But before I go off in that, I want to hear just on that question, me alone, I'll say before we get to you, Bob. But I would like to say in this, John, in your question, do you see a change? I remember growing up, and Kimball would know this too, when Martin Luther King was murdered, on that time I was a little girl, but I remember how my parents cried. They were upset. It was just like their hope had died. And so it was hard for them. And Martin and Malcolm X too was a few people who they thought, who they had their hope in. And so things sort of took place because there was a Black person who said to me, do you really think things are going to change? Things aren't going to really change. And I asked him, I said, when you go downtown now, and you go on the bus, are you allowed to sit down or stand up? And so he said, I sit down. I said, well, there has been some progress. Because now you're sitting down. We can say whatever you want to say about that, but that's progress because you're sitting down on the bus now. You're not being arrested for standing up, letting a white person sit down. So whatever progress it is, we've made some progress to this point where we could protest and we can say, you know what, that's not right anymore. I believe in all of this. And this is what bothers me about the church, is because the progress that's going to take place, that's why the enemy is targeting the church so hard. Because the progress that's going to take place, it's going to take place. We can get all the books, everything that we want. They can be good books, bad books, however you want to say, but it's going to start in that spirit realm. It's going to start spirit, soul, and body. And so as far as that's concerned, with what's taking place, I have it. And I have to say, I have it in my spirit, because this door with Obama being in office, that wasn't a mistake. With him being the nationality he was, being mixed, that wasn't a mistake. Everything, God knew everything. And so people were upset because he was in office, whatever they had to say about it. But I believe, this is my personal opinion, I believe the church was exposed during that time. Because while we were singing Kumbaya, I don't see color, God is, you know, we were singing all that. But when he went in office, you saw a side of the church that you didn't think exists. And I was at House of Yahweh at that time. And I can remember we always, for presidents before that, we would pray for those in authority. You know, we got to pray, whoever's in, we're going to pray for, because the scripture says pray for those in authority. And I can remember sitting in one Bible study after Obama. This was, I don't remember if it was the first time or the second time. You remember, Herbie? I don't remember if it was the first time or second time. And somebody stood up and said, oh my gosh, Obama is in office. Barack Obama is in office. We have to pray because it was like an evil spirit was released. The Antichrist has come because a Black man is in office. So surely it got to be the last days, and Jesus got to be coming, because this cannot be. And I remember raising my hand, and this boldness, I have to say, came because I knew soon, I didn't know when, but I wasn't going to be a part of that particular church anymore. So, and I remember raising my hand and saying, wait a minute, You have taught us for years, and I was at the church. I was in Indiana since I was 17. That's when I came up there to school. Now, for all these years, we prayed for those in authority. Now, the scripture has changed suddenly. We don't pray for those in authority. We don't pray for him. So what's going on? And so that sort of went to the ground. And so when Donald Trump came in office, I think it was the same thing. He just exposed who everybody was. I mean, even though as obnoxious as he was, I watched the church, and I'm sure you did too, shift scriptures around.
Oh, yeah.
You know, good is bad now and bad is good. What he does is because of a prophecy. You know, I love prophecy. I love the prophetic, don't get me wrong. But when you are using the prophetic to be pathetic, I have something to say about it. Because the word is the word, and we don't shift it. We don't call adultery, oh, that's good now because I have a prophecy that Donald Trump is the one to be in office. I understand if you believe Donald Trump is supposed to be in office, I get that. But that does not mean what he does is good. You have to call black, black, blue, blue. You can't, divert things in the name of a prophecy. And so I'm sticking to it. That's what I said.
Well said.
You didn't
Bob?
stutter.
Bob Santos, is your turn. Join in.
Okay.
You don't know where to go from here, huh?
What's that?
I said you don't know where to go from here. Kimball took
Well,
it
no,
too far,
I
didn't
can
you?
just answer the question that we started with. I'm just thinking of how many questions we're going to get answered here in an hour's time.
I don't know, Bob, but we'll hit what we can.
Maybe half of one.
Yeah.
I think my perspective on this issue is a little bit different. I grew up in a small Western Pennsylvania town that was pretty much exclusively white.
Okay.
So I share that, with Jackie and John a little bit as far as the small town and everything. What's different for me is my father was from Ecuador, so I have a Hispanic name. And
So that's where Santos came from.
Right.
Okay.
Our daughter-in-law is
And,
from Ecuador.
What's that?
Our daughter-in-law is from Ecuador.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Oh.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So what I experienced growing up was that anything different was often ridiculed. And so I took a fair amount of abuse for my name. And I can't say that it was everybody, but my situation was vulnerable enough that it was very painful and traumatic for me.
Okay.
It certainly wasn't near the point that I had to worry about dying or anything like that. But I experienced enough that I was sensitized to the issue. Then I went to college, went to IUP. Again, we never had any Black people in our community. There was most of the talk, some of it was racist, some of it wasn't, but I think that a lot of it was Black was different. And anything that was different was considered to be odd or not normal, if you want to put it that way. So when I went to college, ended up having my first Black friend in one of my classes, and we became pretty decent friends, for a short period of time while he was in my life. And I had an experience, and this goes the other way, where three of us were walking across campus, and two of us were white, and AP was the Black friend. And there were a group of his Black friends, and their displeasure with him hanging out with us was evident. So the sensitivity that I had to the issue of being different, was kind of heightened at that point. Then I became a Christian, and that began to change my whole perspective. It began to give me a different, view on everything. And my first job out of college, which is just maybe 2 or 3 years after becoming a Christian, I worked with a woman who was a white supremacist. And I didn't realize it at first. We were talking about Bible studies, and here she had a Bible study in her home, and oh, well, that's good, And as we got to talking, something seemed off, and the more we talked, the more we realized that she was part of the
KKK?
No, it's called the Christian Identity Movement.
Yeah.
Okay, KKK, that's what I said.
Yeah.
They're kind of, but I think they're slightly
White
different.
supremacists have Bible studies?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, they
Ab-
use the scriptures to justify their racism.
Absolutely.
So that kind of was part of my journey to recognize, and um, it compelled me to look a little more closely at the scriptures, to come up with my perspective on everything. And I had other Black friends through college as Christians and everything. So, but this forced me to get into the Word a little bit more and to know why I rejected their perspective. And she wasn't, as far as personality goes, she was okay, as everybody got along with her. But her husband would sometimes come in for dinner on second shift, and he was scary. He was the type of guy that you knew that he wouldn't bat an eye to kill somebody. So that was another part of the experience. I also had, and this is, you mentioned the KKK. I found out from a cousin, and then my aunt verified this recently, that my grandfather had been beat up by the KKK. And he was a coal miner from Hungary. He was beat up really badly. He lost his job. That forced him to go to another mine to work, and then he ended up losing his life in that mine.
Okay.
So there was a pretty strong influence, in our family with that. So I've had all of this to sensitize me to the issue, is what I'm saying. But what has really solidified my perspective is my study of the scriptures. And one of the things I began about 25 years ago was a quest to know how to live the Christian life. I just felt like we were really falling down on that end of it, that we preached a good game, but we really weren't living it. And it started with me. I was struggling a lot in my own faith. And so since that time, this quest has led me to become a student of human nature. And I have tried to understand human nature through the lens of the scripture. And that has led me to a realization that one of the key issues for Christian living is the issue of identity. And that if we're looking to see racial reconciliation, that it really needs to come through the gospel. I see the gospel not just as a message of future destiny, but a message of present day identity.
Yes.
So what I have found is that if the gospel is understood, and I can get into the specifics of this, it's a little bit more involved of a Bible study to explain how it actually works. But if the gospel is understood and applied, I think that racism becomes a very small issue. Not unimportant, but it just isn't a focus. And I am part of a church that has hired multicolored staff. I am part of a fellowship that has worked very hard at pushing for racial reconciliation. So I have been a part of a couple key groups of people in my life that I feel are very biblically minded in this. And so I see it working when we handle it in a way that I believe is biblical.
Right.
So that's my answer to your question.
Okay. So that sort of is your answer a little bit, Bob. Your question was, how does the gospel facilitate racial reconciliation?
Yes.
Sort of touched it a little bit.
I touched on it. But I think there's a little bit of a process involved. I mean, one of the key issues in scripture is the issue of glory, which is tied to identity. Another key issue is the issue of law and law-based living, which is also tied to identity. And those aren't connections that we normally make in our Christian living, our Christian talk. But if you go to Ephesians chapter 2, starting with verse 11 through the end of the chapter, Paul talked about the conflict between the Jews and the Gentiles and the animosity between the two groups, and how the cross of Jesus Christ destroyed that animosity.
Absolutely.
And what I have found is that that very much applies to every area of life. That if we understand how to apply the gospel and how to apply the cross to our identities, that it destroys the animosity that separates us. So that has been my predominant focus when I'm looking at this issue. And I've just come to the opinion, and I don't, I disagree a little bit with Kimball in the sense that I do realize the importance of laws and everything, but my experience is that the laws don't change the hearts. It's the gospel that changes hearts. And so
that was my point too.
It is the gospel that changes the hearts, but it's the laws that protect us until hearts change.
I understand.
And so, I'm telling my age here, but, I was alive when the Voting Rights Act, came about, and all of the iterations. I actually have a picture of my grandparents voting for the first time.
Wow.
And so that is something that has to happen. I remember in 1972 with the Fair Credit Act, my mother not being able to have her own checking account or having a mortgage. So laws have to change, whether people's hearts change or not. That's not, and I don't mean this in a mean-spirited way. That's not my focus anymore. Because I recognize I'm just a micro influencer. I'm just a very small person, but I can help people, be safe until hearts do change.
Right.
And I think that is as my focus now, to make sure that there is fairness in this society, which I believe is godly. If you work hard, and do your things, there should not be these barriers of race, but they are. Right. And they are huge. They are monumental in the church. And because I live here in the South, I have a front row seat to the generations that have come after this. It is unbelievable. There's something called the Blexodus. I don't know if you all are familiar with it, but it much like House of Yahweh, where you just have a smattering of a few people here and there. In one church, you may have 10 Black folks. In another church, you may have 5, 6, or 7. And there has been, over the last 3 years, an exodus out of white churches, of Black folks. And Sharon touched on it a little bit. It's because it's not together that the Black folks got together, mostly because we were from Philly. Right. But there were times where we just needed a break. We didn't need a Black space. We needed an affirming space. We didn't have to code switch. We could speak in shorthand and not have to explain every little teeny tiny thing. You could just come up, you could say what you got to say. Some of it was Philadelphia-ese, but some of it was just, good gosh, I just need a break. I remember one time specifically, and this kind of tore me up, and I'm of a certain age now where I'm just going to speak unfiltered. I was part of a music ministry there, and there's a delightful couple, love them. And they had some nuts, and they were just offering them around. They turned, "Hey, Kimball, would you like a nigger toe?"
Oh, gosh.
And then after that, you just had to get up and sing with them. You just got to do what you have to do. But on the inside, I was absolutely wrecked, because that let me know that that's part of their everyday lexicon. And they were not speaking to another white person. It was just, that's what we call Brazil nuts, nigger toes. And would you like one? And after that, I was like, oh, tee-hee-hee, oh, I'm so sorry, but you don't mind, do you? Kind of a thing. That happened all the time. It got so old. By the time we were ready to move to Raleigh, I was exhausted and I needed to get out of there. Indiana is a very hard place to live for Black folks. A very, very hard place. I remember it took Paula and I a year and a half to get an apartment for people who would even rent to Black folks. It took Skip and I a year after we were married. It took Paul and I remember one time we were so excited we were going to cover a new chair that her mother sent to us. And we went up to the upholstery place there. Sharon, you might have heard this.
Yeah, on Philadelphia Street.
On Philadelphia Street. And the owner was there and we were excited. We were like, oh, we need a yard of this and a yard of that. And he brought out the most hideous, you could tell it was overstocked, orange and green brocade. It was unbelievable. It was ugly. He said, well, I'll sell this to you gals for $16 a yard. And we looked at each other. We said, no, thank you. And I think Pauline said, that's unattractive. He exploded. You niggers, get out of here. You take what we give you. But all the time. It wasn't always microaggression. So I say that to say, this is why my push is not so much, and we all have a different lane. We all have different ministry. But mine is a little more focused on how the next generation is going to be able to negotiate, navigate in a fair-minded way through life, and to lower these particular barriers that have been erected mostly by the church. You talk about killing of Martin Luther King. That night, Full Gospel businessmen had the biggest party they ever had. They believed God finally came. That black thing was dead. You can read all of these different accounts, and so that speaks to a generation. That speaks to people. Ronald Reagan said he got exactly what he deserved, to get shot in the head, and it's about time. And all of these things are verifiable. And so those are the big things, but the smaller things that we have to deal with day to day, I think we have to speak to them. And if we have to have people of color in office to change it, to change the atmosphere for the next generation, then so be it.
I see your point much better now than I did before. Therefore, are you pushing to get Black people to vote?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Because we could vote this guy right out of office if people would just get behind it.
Yes. And it is twofold down here, particularly in North Carolina. I'm sure you've heard all the stuff that went on in Western Pennsylvania, in Western North Carolina, particularly in Lenoir County, where all ALL, the polling places in Black neighborhoods, were shut down by design. A huge barrier. You had to go at least an hour and a half away. Those were the closest places. Then you had to, and then the gerrymandering and all of this. And so part of my push is working with people within the party is to make sure that of the watchdogs that we have, that these barriers do not come down again. Because it's unbelievable. We have men who actually went to jail because of all the tricks and the lies in the last 2 years that they have played. And so that has got to be part of it. Not just getting people ready to run, but make sure that they have simply a polling place.
Yeah, I hear you. Wow.
I think the way that you phrased it, Kimball, is helpful, in that the laws are necessary to protect.
Absolutely.
I think that, to see real change, you've got, I'm not saying that you deal with one or the other,
no,
but
both.
you realize that each has its place.
Yes, that's right.
The laws are there to protect, and they're necessary to protect. I mean, that's all of society, but certainly that applies in this situation. But then ultimately, long term, I think that there has to be the change of heart as well.
To sustain it, absolutely.
Yeah.
And for me personally, that is the realm that I live in.
Yeah.
That's the focus that I feel like God has given to me.
I mean, we need all of that because the Bible talks about us being spirit, soul, and body. So all of it is important. We can't just magnify one over the other, but that order is important. Spirit, because there are things we have to know that we won already while we're fighting. If we know we already won certain territory because we received it in the spirit, we can fight well. As opposed to thinking, I'm just spinning the wheels. I mean, we've been going through this for 200 years. Nothing's going to change. But if we have it spiritually, then we can fight and we can do everything that everybody is talking about. We can do what Kimball was talking about. But all of those areas need to be touched. I mean, the church needs to preach the truth. They need to stop lying and making it a black gospel. I mean, a white gospel, as though, Jesus came just for white people. Jesus came for everybody. So the church has to change their thinking. And there are some things naturally that have to take place. And in those places, we have activists and we have different people who are willing to go in and die for the cause, some of them. But there are things that people have to be bold enough to say enough is enough. And God has opened the door at this time. He has opened the door. Because if this conversation would have taken place when my mother and father were alive, there might be, people are dying now for speaking out, but not to the level they were with Kimball when our parents were. I mean, you have to say that, right?
Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So,
and it does take both places. I'm sorry, this is just real quick. Dr. Derek Morphew, we had our Vineyard Scholars at our church, and they came from all over the world. And Dr. Morphew, and I believe Carolyn and John took his course at their church.
Yeah.
And he is from South Africa, and he was just the little strangest person I ever saw, walking around with this huge shock of white hair and no shoes. And he would just look in, he would appear on conversations. He was just a very amazing person. But when he got up and he spoke out of Ephesians about tearing down the wall, he and Bishop Tutu had been friends for 30 years. And they strategized with the church and with the legislature, and they came together. They fasted, I believe, for 10 years, every week for, a certain amount of days for 10 years, until the Lord showed them exactly what to do. And the Lord showed them that you must have fasting and prayer, and you must have protest. And the Lord gave them specific strategies for specific days. I mean, it was a battle plan. He was saying you needed absolutely both arms in order to change. And it looks like apartheid came down quickly, but it didn't. It was 25 years of the faithfulness of saints who were able to do both: educate, legislate, pray, and fast.
Right.
He was he is the most amazing man. And he talked about it so eloquently. And he said something that really touched me. He said, if someone is speaking of building a wall, they are very naughty.
Is that what you said?
He said they're very, very naughty.
So does that answer a lot of questions?
Yes.
Yes. And Bob, one of your questions was, we may have sort of answered it, but you say, how can we bring a healthy accountability? No, we didn't touch this at all. How can we bring a healthy accountability to the police department? How can we do this? In light of what we're talking about, how can that be changed?
Well,
that was my question.
That is your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, personally, I've seen a healthy
Bob,
change.
that don't mean that you can't answer that question.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, just quickly, my dad worked in Camden, New Jersey, for 30 years at Campbell's Soup. And if you remember, Camden had one of the most corrupt police departments in the nation. And we grew up in Philly, under Rizzo. And that's saying something.
Which was
that Camden was unbelievably corrupt. They completely defunded, and defunded doesn't mean that they got rid of the police. It does not mean that.
Right.
What happened was they made a community panel and a police panel, and they brought them together. I think there were 6 or 8 of them, because the police were sick of it too. They were sick of the corruption that nobody could really speak to without getting shot, without being set up, their family threatened. The police absolutely wanted this. And so the money was taken, some of the money was taken away from the police department, and they were given back to education in schools and the things that actually help a community. They made every police person reapply for their job. They didn't fire anybody, just reapply. And they got feedback from the community. Yes, this one is corrupt. This one's a good guy, all of that. And these decades later, Camden is still doing well.
I heard about Camden on the news as the epitome of what can be done in a police department.
Yes. And I believe they tried that in Las Vegas. It worked to an extent until there was a change in legislation. So it can work as long as you put the money. You don't need 15 tanks. That's close to $50 million that you could give you know what a school could do with $50 million.
Right, exactly. Yes.
You know, and change the trajectory of kids' lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so the accountability of police have to almost begin with police.
Yeah. The
Yes. Good ones, the good cops.
Mm-hmm. And there are some good ones. They are.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And they don't get the noise.
Mm-hmm.
The bad ones take up so much oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what can be done to support the good ones and to facilitate more in that regard?
I think they're the hotlines, the place where they can be free and anonymous. I know in terms of Camden, New Jersey, it was the free press, journalism exposing it, naming names. It all works together. And if anyone is being squelched, it's difficult. It's so nuanced and it's so interconnected, you know. And
you have some cops coming out now, going into the community and showing that they're different. I mean, they have to take, you know, that we're not like that. We're not like every other cop. I mean, that's their part in doing stuff as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree.
So, and this, I love this question. I love this one. It says, have you specifically witnessed racist interaction in the church? Where and when? This is a question from Kimball. But have you guys, because using your white privilege, this is really a place where it should be used. Have you heard, now some of you touched on it a little bit, that you haven't seen any kind of racist stuff or heard any. That's going to be kind of hard for my ears to hear, because now that you're in an arena where you're hearing stuff, what are you hearing and what are you speaking into those situations? I mean, I know, Bob, that you said knowing who we are, our identity of knowing who we are, that is important to me. I mean, I have a page on Facebook, it's geared towards women, and it's called DDWW, Divinely Designed Women of Wisdom, because I think it is so important to know who you are. If we don't know who we are, we can't tell, if we can't help ourselves, I can't help you if I'm not accepted with who I am. We did a panel once on colorism, and it was just Black people on the panel. And, you know, I believe all of this stuff comes about. I know all of this stuff comes about. This racism comes about. It comes from hell. I mean, we all have to agree with that. Absolutely. And so in that, we have to deal with it spiritually. We have to know who we are in Christ Jesus so we can fight properly and fair, expecting to win. That's important. But then once that is settled, where do we go from there? How do we handle stuff? You know, so I like that. I like the different perspectives. I like your perspective, Bob, and Kimball's, because we need all of this. And John and Jackie, of course. I love it, John and Jackie, that you're so willing to say, I didn't know. I didn't, you know, now my ears are open to hear what's going on. What can I do? What can I do? What can I say? So how are you using your white privilege? Have you had an opportunity to use it in a different way now that you've learned some things?
I had a fun little thing. I don't know if it meant anything, but it certainly was enjoyable. I had a student at Seeds of Faith, a little Black girl that played the saxophone. And I had her in 7th grade, and then she transferred to the public schools in 8th grade. And she led a Black Lives Matters rally.
Oh.
8th grader.
8th grade.
Yeah, we met at the Rite Aid on 4th Street and marched all the way down to the courthouse, hollering at the top of our lungs the whole way.
Wow.
And this little girl organized the whole thing, but it was so much fun for me because just when we were organizing the set to go, I walked up to her and I gave her a big hug and I said, "Did you practice your saxophone today?"
Oh, stop.
He gave him a big hug. It was very precious, and we got in line to do
it was so much fun, you know, but I don't get opportunities like that very often.
We did one of these panels, and it was a pastor from London. And so he was a pastor over several churches in London. And he said, and he has, you know, specks of black people in each church, and he said he had some of them over his house for dinner, and it was like how we had, I guess, at House of Yahweh, there was some contact. He said, but he did not realize how after all of this stuff had taken place in the news, with George Floyd and different things that had taken place, and then he began to question some of the black people in his congregation with what was going on, and he said he was just really, as the Brits said, gobsmacked. He said, for many years, I knew these black people, but I didn't really know them. He said, because he said, I knew that they were black. I knew that they loved Jesus. He said, but I did not know what they were going through. He said, and I didn't even try to find out. He said, with what's taking place now, it made me dig. And so within his churches, he's changing the trajectory, as Kimball, as you mentioned, he's changing like the staff and the leadership, not just putting, he said this, and I love this. He said, we're not just putting them because black people are good with music. He said, we're putting them in leadership positions to teach and to preach and to, other positions other than music, even though that's important. And Kimball, I heard you say once, yeah, black people are good with music, but have you ever heard the Latinos? So I mean, music is good, and I believe we're gifted in that area, but we need those positions because you need to know us from the inside out, not from just what we do. Everybody agree? Everybody looks like my screen froze.
No, yeah, we agree.
Yeah, okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to take over, but keep talking to me.
No, I was going to say, you really won't know.
Did you say figgin' to say?
Huh? No, I did not say that. I'm not that Southern yet.
Okay.
No, what I was saying was that I wonder why I don't see a lot of white people in black spaces, and particularly churches. If we want to bridge the gap, it's always inviting black people into white spaces, always, always, always. And I was like, if you want to know black people and you want to know how we worship Jesus and what the culture looks like, you have to come out of your white church and get into a black church for a year or two. Fall in love.
Yes.
Fall in love.
Yes.
Because that's where it starts. That's where the healing starts. And our church, which is predominantly white, we have a value of telling it the stories. That is a huge, huge value in our church. The story of someone is sacred. You don't just tell it to anyone. And we hold it as very sacrosanct. And the difference of hearing someone's story and just being in church with them week after week is night and day. And if you really, really want to be a change agent, you have to go into spaces that make you uncomfortable. Hear stories that you don't like. Be with people you don't understand or scare you. One of the elders at our church, she and I serve on the elder board, and she's Cherokee, but she's like, black church scares me. Like, you about to get good and scared. Come on, girl. And we explore and do some things. Right. And so you won't, that fear, that barrier will not collapse unless you intentionally insert yourself into the black community. Or Latino or indigenous.
A few years ago, I went to which is the church in Indiana where the pastor is about 9 feet tall?
Oh, Victory. You're talking about Victory?
Victory. That started as David
Hansen. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, he came from Victory, but he's a part of a Baptist church, I think, in Chevy Chase.
I went there one Sunday. I just wanted to see what it was like. And I didn't feel very welcomed.
Not.
I imagine it's the same way when you walk into a white church. People look at you as though, what are you doing here?
Right.
And that's how I felt in reverse, I thought I was reaching out, and I was, it was uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's I'm sorry, Kimball. That's probably right. I mean, it's the same way we felt when we go to white churches.
I realize that.
You have to keep going. I mean, we could go in and say, well, I'm not going to come back but you have to keep going and press in. I mean, that's how it is. I mean, to begin with, and I can say from my perspective of being a black woman, I mean, I was taught as a child not to trust white people. I mean, I remember when I was going to IUP to go to college, and my father was like, "Are you sure?" And then when I decided I was going to stay, he thought it was okay for you to go to college up there and learn with those white people, but to live with them, you can't trust them. And so that's the thinking in Black people's minds. Those barriers come down when we interact with one another.
I have to go get my power cord.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm just going to say that I had a different experience at Victory. I taught a series on identity there for pretty much a whole semester. I think it was like on a Wednesday evening.
Oh, wow.
And the students were predominantly African American.
Yeah.
They were white, but predominantly African American. And of course, it was more than one visit. It was over a period of weeks. And we had a really nice time together. I really enjoyed that interaction.
But Bob, you also have a reputation as a Black woman. I can say, I know your reputation. You have a reputation of being open to Black folks. And so we generally pass that around.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It's the truth.
It is.
Tell
We
the
pass it
truth.
around.
Yeah. And we know who's not safe either.
Right. So John, I would just like to suggest to you to keep going back and make them fall in love with you.
Part of what influenced me was college ministry. I mean, we dealt with students who were Black, who were Latino, who were Muslim, who were from all over the world, different places. Students who had green hair and purple hair and tattoos and spikes. And you just learn, you learn to love them all, and you realize that the exterior isn't really the issue. It's the heart. And so that's the level that we've tried to live on.
I've had many good Black students at IUP in the music department, and but I didn't realize. I thought at the time that something was being accomplished, or that I was doing a good thing, but I didn't realize that they were in my environment. I wasn't in their environment.
Right.
And so they were just cooperating with me, and the fact that they were talented made life easier. I'm still Facebook friends with several of them, but it's not enough.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not changing anything to get back to that issue. If we do this again, I'd like the two of you to do a little investigation into your own lives and see if you could come up with some facts, some evidence, or bring a white person with you. Formerly
bring a white friend to work.
Was formerly racist.
Bring a white friend to work.
They changed their mind.
John.
That's hilarious.
I do have something I would like to touch on at some point, and I don't know that it necessarily is for tonight because it's kind of going long, but it's related to what John is saying is how, and this I suppose is another question, how do we win over hearts so that we can bring racial reconciliation? And it's tied to my question about the gospel. But there's a specific focus on it that I think really is important to be addressed at some point in time.
Right. So that means, Bob, you're going to do part 2?
I suppose that I am, because it's, if we're going to get into it, I think we need a little bit of time to talk.
Absolutely.
Good.
So does anybody else, because I think I touched on all the questions, but I think I've learned a lot. I mean, I did. I'm not just saying that because you're on this panel, but I love your openness. I love your honesty. And I love how you want to use your white privilege. I don't think white privilege is a bad thing. I think it is a thing where you go back because each one teach one. And John, that's important. You may not change 5,000 people talking to them, but there's one-on-one that sometimes makes all the difference. I mean, I know when Kimball and I were in college, and Kimball would probably say the same thing, there was a professor there. I don't think he was the director of human affairs, Connors.
Connors.
And he was an African-American man. And I know Indiana was so different from where I came from. I struggled so hard in it, but my mother made me stay there. She said, because you couldn't wait to get away from home, that you're going to stay up, because I wanted to transfer back to Philadelphia to Drexel. But my behind wanting to be so grown, it was like, I want to go to upstate Pennsylvania. I want to go to school so I can get away from home. And she said, well, now you're going to stay there. And so I had to adapt, but Mr. Connors was such a liaison between me and reality and school for me. You know what I mean? He was that person. And it was that one-on-one. I don't know if he passed, but when I was in Indiana, we would have him over for dinner from time to time. And I mean, he was such a branch of life for me. And John, I'm saying that because to somebody, you are a branch of life, and you can continue to be. I mean, I always loved your honesty and your openness. I remember when my daughter went home to be with the Lord, and John and Jackie, I don't know if you remember this, but John called us up on the phone, and we went over your house for dinner. He was like, I want to know what happened. What went on. And we sat at your table and we talked about it. And that was so, I don't know what it did to you, but it did a lot for Herbie and I. Your honesty and your bluntness and your boldness means a lot, and it's a lifesaver. So please don't stop being John. You're making a difference.
Well, that's kind of you to say.
I mean it. I
don't see the difference. Mary gets frustrated with me because I want results and I want them right now.
Yeah.
And that may not come. But and if I could just interject before I know we're getting late, but our church does something called the open table, and people open up their homes for 6 weeks at a time before COVID, and 10 people come, maybe 12 at the most, 14. And you become your own little community for about 6 weeks. And I went to an open table. It is so scriptural. Our pastor developed an entire curriculum around it, and it was so wonderful. I heard stories that I would have never heard, but over a meal, things kind of relax. Wow. And and I also went to an open table. She had to be our police chief here in Raleigh. She's a Black woman. And so what she knows is Southern. And she had the police and the community, and they hired out. And I went, and there are like half civilian and half police to the table, and you break bread together, you laugh, you talk, you exchange numbers. It broke down so many barriers, and that can also be translated into racial reconciliation. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with being intentional about it.
Yeah.
Take an 8 or 10 week period over the holidays, whenever we're released from this crazy lockdown, and have specific people over, particularly of a different race. If you have some indigenous people, or you have people who are from the hills, but it must be intentional, and ask questions. Over a meal, you would be surprised how hearts are changed. And those whom we've had the specific, honor to get to know, they become so protective of us.
Yeah.
And the hearts are knit together. It can't just be something you wait for. Oh, it'll be organic. No, this must be intentional because God is intentional.
Yeah.
And so that might be a good place, John, since you want results, where you might see, and they might actually be measurable, because week to week to week to week, you get to know more and more people. Maybe it could be around a book, but it always has, John, our pastor is always insistent it has to be a meal. It must be a meal.
I love it.
Everybody must bring something, and everybody must clean up.
I love it.
That's the kind of meal I like.
Well,
everybody, thank you so much for coming. And this was part one. We're going to do part two. And everybody heard Bob say he would do part two, right? Everybody not
heard you.
We heard you, Bob.
Yes, if I'm invited, yeah. Well.
I love this. Thank you so much. This was so good. Everybody appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you for organizing.
Yep. I can thank you two for many, many things, but I won't take time for that. But I want to thank you for not getting tired of helping us white folks. I really, really
thank you.
Yeah, really, Kimball. I listened to you, and I think I'm getting tired. I can't imagine what you mean when you say you're getting tired.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
God is, he's rejuvenating. He's rejuvenating.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
Thank you
So
very
I love you guys, and you'll be
Love
hearing
you so
from me
much,
again.
Kim.
All
John,
right.
you're not done. Jackie, you're not done. Bob and Kimble, you know you're not done. I love you guys. Give me a high five.
God bless you.
Yes, high
God bless
five.
everybody.
God
Thank
bless
you
you.
so much.
Blessings,
Thank you.
blessings.
And you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.